The glass shattered before anyone raised their voice. A crystal tumbler exploded against the polished conference room wall, spraying whiskey across framed awards that no longer meant anything. No one flinched. They had grown used to watching powerful men lose control. "You expect us to report to an 18-year-old? One shareholder spat, slamming both hands on the table. "This company is already dead." Silence followed. Not respectful silence. The kind reserved for funerals. Every pair of eyes slowly turned toward me. No sympathy. No encouragement. Only curiosity. They wanted to see how quickly I would break. At the head of the table sat my father's empty chair. No one had touched it since the funeral. Its black leather still bore the faint crease from years of his presence. But today it looked less like a seat of authority and more like a monument to failure. The lawyer quietly pushed a thick folder toward me. "According to Chairman Nathan Hale's final will," he said, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers, "all controlling shares have been transferred to his only son." The room erupted. "This is insanity. He's still a child. Sell everything before the banks liquidate us. We're wasting time." I didn't answer. Not because I lacked courage. Because every word they shouted revealed exactly what they feared. Hale Dynamics wasn't simply bankrupt. Someone desperately wanted it buried. Outside the panoramic windows, rain hammered against the city skyline. It blurred thousands of lights into streaks that looked like tears running down glass. 3 days earlier, those same lights had illuminated my father's funeral procession. 3 days. That was all it had taken for men who had toasted him for decades to begin carving up what remained. The lawyer cleared his throat. "There is one more condition." Everyone fell quiet. "If Mr. Adrian Hale declines the inheritance, ownership transfers to the board for restructuring." Several directors exchanged quick glances. Too quick. Too hopeful. One of them even smiled before catching himself. I noticed everything. Because grief had done something strange. It hadn't made me weaker. It had made the world painfully clear. The debts. The missing financial records. The conveniently timed bankruptcy filing. The board's unusual confidence. None of it felt accidental. A heavy envelope rested beneath the legal documents. My name was written across it in my father's handwriting. The ink had smudged slightly. He must have written it while his hands were shaking. I opened it. Inside was a single page. "Adrian, if you're reading this, then I failed to protect both you and the company. Do not trust titles. Do not trust loyalty that depends on money. And above all, don't let them make your decision for you." No explanation. No list of enemies. Only one final sentence. The company isn't dying because it ran out of money. It's dying because someone keeps feeding on it. I folded the letter slowly. The room waited. "So," the largest shareholder demanded, "are you accepting?" Every instinct screamed that I should walk away. The company owed hundreds of millions. Banks were preparing lawsuits. Employees hadn't been paid for weeks. Suppliers were abandoning contracts. Even the media had already begun calling Hale Dynamics the city's largest corporate corpse. Accepting meant inheriting disaster. Declining meant surrendering the only thing my father had died trying to protect. I stood. The movement alone silenced everyone. "I'll sign." The lawyer blinked. "Are you certain?" "Yes." The shareholder laughed openly. "Congratulations." He leaned back comfortably. "You've just inherited a graveyard." I met his eyes. "Then I suppose I'll learn who buried it." For the first time all afternoon, no one laughed. By sunset, every news channel had my photograph on screen. 18-year-old heir takes control of bankrupt empire. Commentators mocked me. Financial analysts predicted bankruptcy within weeks. Anonymous insiders claimed I had already begun selling company assets. They lied with remarkable confidence. I returned to headquarters long after everyone had left. The enormous lobby echoed with emptiness. Half the lights had already been turned off to save electricity. Reception desks sat abandoned. Dust collected in corners no one bothered cleaning anymore. A security guard recognized me and stood awkwardly. "Mr. Hale." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry about your father." I nodded. "How many employees still come to work?" He hesitated. "About 60%. "Why?" "They're hoping someone remembers they exist." That answer hurt more than the financial statements. I rode the elevator alone. Every floor felt abandoned. Entire departments had disappeared. Cubicles stood empty. Family photographs remained on desks, waiting for owners who had already accepted jobs elsewhere. My father's office overlooked the river. Nothing had changed. His watch rested beside unfinished paperwork. A coffee mug still sat half full. The room smelled faintly of cedar and ink, as though he had only stepped outside. I lowered myself into his chair. It felt far too large. The computer required a password. I tried my birthday. Denied. His birthday. Denied. Then I remembered the last thing he had said before entering surgery. No matter what happens, finish what deserves finishing. I typed, finish it. The screen unlocked. A hidden folder appeared automatically. Its name chilled me. If they win. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. Fear had already exhausted itself during the funeral. Now there was only determination. The folder contained dozens of encrypted financial reports, internal emails, supplier contracts, and handwritten notes scanned into digital files. One spreadsheet stood out immediately. It listed dozens of companies receiving consulting payments from Hale Dynamics. Millions of dollars. Every month. The problem? Half the companies didn't seem real. No websites. No offices. No employees. Just names. Someone had been draining the company for years. The office door opened without warning. I closed the folder instantly. A middle-aged woman stood there carrying 2 cardboard boxes. She froze. So, she forced a tired smile. You really came. I work here now. For how long? She wasn't being cruel. Only honest. She placed the boxes onto a cabinet. I forgot some personal things. I noticed the framed employee award inside. 27 years of service. You resigned? They eliminated my department. When? This morning. I frowned. I never approved layoffs. She laughed quietly. That's because no one asked. Something inside me shifted. If people were making executive decisions before I had even taken control, then someone already believed they owned the company. What department? Internal auditing. That caught my attention. The entire department. She nodded. Every last one. Why? She looked away. We started asking difficult questions. The room suddenly felt much colder. She reached into one of the boxes and removed a flash drive. I was debating whether to destroy this. She held it between 2 fingers. Maybe it belongs to you. I accepted it carefully. What's on it? Our final investigation. She studied my expression. If you open it. There's no pretending afterward. Before I could ask more, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and immediately went pale. I should leave. Who was that? No one. It clearly wasn't no one. She swallowed. Mr. Hale. Her voice dropped to a whisper. People lose careers for discovering financial fraud. Another pause. They lose more than careers if the money is large enough. She hurried toward the door. Halfway out, she stopped. Your father trusted too easily. She looked back. Don't make the same mistake. The door closed. The office became silent again. I stared at the flash drive resting beside my father's watch. Outside, lightning split the evening sky. The next morning began with another humiliation. Every major bank representative gathered in the boardroom. None bothered hiding their contempt. Our position is simple, the lead banker said. Immediate repayment. We don't have immediate liquidity. Then liquidation. One director quickly nodded. A reasonable proposal. Too quickly. Again. I watched him carefully. Victor Lang. Senior board member. 30 years with the company. My father's closest business associate. At least publicly. He never once looked surprised by the bank's demands. Almost as though he already knew every word they intended to say. The meeting ended without agreement. As everyone filed out, Victor approached me. You remind me of your father. I've heard that before. He believed everyone deserved another chance. And you? I believe weak businesses deserve dignified endings. His smile never reached his eyes. You could still walk away. I already signed. Contracts can disappear. So can evidence. His expression changed for less than a second. Tiny. Almost invisible. But enough. I had guessed correctly. There was something he feared. Late that night, I finally inserted the flash drive. Only one folder appeared. Insurance. Inside were scanned invoices, secret payment approvals, and recorded conversations. One audio file was dated 6 months earlier. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the office. Those companies don't exist. Another voice answered calmly. Then stop looking. You've stolen from Hale Dynamics. No. A pause. We've merely accelerated its inevitable collapse. The recording ended abruptly. No names. Only voices. I leaned back, staring into darkness. Someone had emptied the company from within. Someone powerful enough to silence entire departments. Someone my father had confronted shortly before his death. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. No one spoke. Only breathing. Then a single sentence. You should have refused the inheritance. The line disconnected. I looked across the office toward the city below. The lights no longer resembled tears. They looked like countless witnesses waiting for the truth. For the first time since signing the papers, I understood what I had truly inherited. Not a bankrupt company. A battlefield. And somewhere inside it, someone had already decided I wouldn't survive long enough to uncover the truth. The first threat arrived before sunrise. Not another anonymous phone call. Not another whispered warning. Someone wanted to send a message that couldn't be ignored. When I stepped out of my apartment building, my car sat exactly where I'd parked it the night before, except every window had been smashed. Rainwater pooled across the seats, soaking the documents I'd left inside. A single white envelope rested on the steering wheel. No stamp. No address. Only my name. I tore it open. Inside was one sentence printed in black ink. The company buried your father. Don't let it bury you. I read it twice, then folded it carefully instead of throwing it away. Fear was exactly what the sender wanted. I refused to give them that satisfaction. By the time I reached Hale Dynamics, employees had already gathered in small clusters throughout the lobby. Their conversation stopped as I walked past. Not because they respected me, because they were measuring me. The 18-year-old who had inherited a collapsing empire. Would I save their jobs? Or would I become the final chapter? The receptionist, a woman in her late 50s named Evelyn, stood as soon as she saw me. Mr. Hale. Good morning. She hesitated. They're waiting upstairs. Who? The department heads. Her expression revealed something more. And the board called an emergency meeting without informing you. I smiled faintly. They're becoming predictable. The boardroom door was already closed. Voices echoed from inside. He has no experience. Banks won't negotiate. Sell the patents before they're worthless. I opened the door. The room fell silent. Victor Lang looked mildly annoyed rather than surprised. We started without you. I noticed. He folded his hands. We've reached a preliminary agreement. What agreement? The company will sell its research division. I stared at him. Our research division generates nearly 40% of long-term revenue. It also requires investment. So your solution is selling the future to pay for the present? Another director leaned forward. Young man, survival comes before ambition. No, I replied calmly. Integrity comes before survival. Several directors exchanged glances. Victor's smile remained polite. Do you understand corporate restructuring? No. Finance? No. International acquisitions? No. He leaned back confidently. Then perhaps you should allow experienced people to make difficult decisions. I met his gaze. Experience is valuable. A pause. So explain why an experienced board drove this company into bankruptcy. No one answered. Victor's fingers tapped the table once. Only once. But it was the first crack in his composure. I reject the sale. One director slammed his notebook shut. You don't have that authority. I own 51%. Silence. The sale is rejected. Victor slowly gathered his papers. This decision will cost you. I imagine that's already happened. An hour later, I walked into the abandoned internal audit department. Dust-coated empty desks. Family photographs had been removed. Computer monitors were gone. Someone had erased every sign that dozens of employees had ever worked there. Except one. A coffee mug remained beside a locked filing cabinet. Its surface read, "Truth leaves paper trails." I knelt beside the cabinet. The lock had been forced open recently. Empty folders filled every drawer. Too clean. Someone had removed evidence. Not long ago. I crouched lower. Tiny scratches lined the metal floor beneath the cabinet, as though something heavy had been dragged away. Not documents. A safe. Someone had taken an entire hidden safe. Behind me, footsteps echoed. I stood instantly. It was the woman from my father's office. The former audit director. She carried another cardboard box. I expected you'd come here. You knew this room. I built this department. She ran her fingers across an abandoned desk. They erased us faster than 27 years of work. What was inside the safe? Her eyes widened slightly. You found the marks. So there was one. She nodded. Copies. Of what? Everything. Where is it? She laughed softly. If I knew. She looked toward the empty cabinet. I wouldn't still be alive. Her name was Margaret Ellis. Until that moment, I had only known her as the woman carrying cardboard boxes out of my father's office. Now I understood why my father trusted her. She noticed details everyone else overlooked. They fired every auditor on the same morning, she said quietly. Why not one at a time? Because one person can be discredited. She met my eyes. An entire department asking identical questions becomes dangerous. We walked through rows of abandoned desks. The fraud wasn't sophisticated, Margaret continued. It was repetitive, meaning small amounts. Small enough individually that no one noticed. She stopped beside a whiteboard still covered in faded notes. But over 6 years, she looked at me. It became hundreds of millions. I felt my jaw tighten. They bled the company slowly, so no one would panic. Exactly, she lowered her voice. Your father discovered it too late. That afternoon, another surprise arrived. Not from the board, from the employees. Nearly 100 workers gathered in the manufacturing courtyard. Mechanics, engineers, administrative assistants, technicians. Some had worked for Hale Dynamics longer than I'd been alive. They weren't protesting. They were waiting. One older mechanic stepped forward. We heard the research division isn't being sold. It isn't. Is that true? Yes. The crowd murmured. Another employee spoke. They said you'd already signed. I haven't. The silence that followed felt different from every silence I'd experienced since inheriting the company. This one carried hope. A young engineer raised her hand. My team hasn't received salaries in 6 weeks. I know. My husband says I should quit. Will you? She looked around at the factory. I built the battery system. Another engineer nodded. I designed the cooling software. A technician added quietly. My father worked here before me. These people weren't clinging to paychecks. They were clinging to something they had helped create. I took a slow breath. I can't promise miracles. No one moved. I won't promise quick success. Still silence. But I promise this. I looked at every face. I won't lie to you. If we're finished, I'll tell you. If we still have a chance, I'll fight for it. No applause followed. Instead, people nodded, one after another. For the first time, they believed me. Not because I sounded powerful, because I admitted uncertainty. That evening, Evelyn knocked on my office door. A visitor. I don't have appointments. He says your father would have seen him. A tall man entered carrying a weathered leather briefcase. Gray hair, simple suit, steady eyes. I'm Daniel Cho. The name meant nothing. I audited suppliers for your grandfather. That changed everything. He placed an old ledger on my desk. I retired 12 years ago. Why come back now? Because yesterday someone tried to buy my silence. He opened the ledger. Inside were handwritten supplier records dating back almost 20 years. They offered a great deal of money. For what? To destroy this. I frowned. Why didn't you? Daniel smiled sadly. Your grandfather once saved my family from bankruptcy. He gently pushed the ledger toward me. I don't forget debts. I opened the first page. Several supplier names matched the fake companies from my father's encrypted files. Except, 20 years earlier, they had been real businesses. Legitimate businesses. Someone had stolen their identities after they closed. The realization struck like lightning. The fraud hadn't created fake companies. It had resurrected dead ones. Names that no regulator would bother investigating. Names buried in forgotten records. Someone had planned this for years. Before I could speak, Daniel looked toward the office windows. They're watching. Who? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the parking lot. A black sedan idled across the street. Its engine never stopped. They've followed me since morning. I stepped toward the window. The sedan's headlights switched on. Then, without warning, it pulled away into the evening traffic. Daniel exhaled slowly. They know I came. He looked directly at me. And now, they know you're no longer fighting alone. Rain fell hard enough to erase the city. From the 32nd floor, the streets below looked like dark rivers carrying headlights downstream. Daniel Cho sat across from me in my father's office, both hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. Neither of us had spoken for almost 5 minutes. Fear changes people. For some, it makes them louder. For others, quieter. Daniel had become very quiet. They followed you all day? I finally asked. He nodded. Since the archive. You went there because of my father? Because of your father, and because I was tired. Tired of what? He stared at the steam rising from the cup. Being afraid. The answer stayed with me. Because I understood it. For 3 months, grief had sat on my shoulders like a weight I couldn't remove. But fear? Fear had slowly become background noise. Almost ordinary. That frightened me more than the threats. My phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Check tomorrow's board agenda. Item 7. No signature. No explanation. I immediately opened the digital agenda. Item 7. Executive restructuring proposal. Attached file. I clicked it. My stomach tightened. It was a motion to suspend my authority as acting chairman due to financial incompetence and emotional instability. The vote was scheduled for tomorrow morning. They weren't trying to pressure me anymore. They were preparing to remove me. I looked at Daniel. They're accelerating. His expression darkened. Then you've become dangerous. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Victor Lang sat perfectly composed at the head of the table. In my father's chair. He didn't stand when I entered. He didn't apologize either. Interesting. Around him sat directors who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Banks had sent observers. Lawyers had arrived. Even 2 media representatives waited outside the glass walls. Victor folded his hands. Shall we begin? I took my seat. No. He raised an eyebrow. No. You seem comfortable in my father's chair. A few directors shifted uneasily. Victor smiled. Someone has to lead. I looked around the room. Then let's discuss leadership. The lawyer cleared his throat. The motion before the board. I know the motion. I slid several printed documents onto the table. Internal payment records. Consulting invoices. Supplier transfers. Every fake company I'd identified. The room went silent. Victor didn't move. Interesting again. I spoke calmly. Before discussing my competence, I tapped the papers. I'd like to discuss theft. One director immediately paled. Another reached for the documents with shaking hands. Victor finally leaned back. Serious accusation. Yes. Do you have proof? No. The room erupted. I raised a hand. I have questions. Silence returned. I looked directly at Victor. Why did internal audit get eliminated the same day they requested supplier verification? No answer. Why were shell companies receiving millions? No answer. Why were long-dead suppliers suddenly active again? Still no answer. Victor remained composed. Too composed. Then he smiled. Because your father approved those payments. Every sound disappeared. For a moment I forgot to breathe. No. Victor slowly opened a folder. Inside were signed authorization documents. My father's signature. Page after page. My chest tightened. Impossible. Margaret had insisted my father was investigating the fraud. Then why? Victor slid the papers toward the board. Your father was many things. His voice softened. But he made mistakes. A director immediately seized the opportunity. This changes everything. Another nodded. The company collapsed under Nathan Hale. Not under them. Not under Victor. Under my father. I understood instantly. This wasn't defense. This was the real plan. Destroy the dead man. Because dead men cannot argue. I didn't speak. I watched. That was the first thing grief had taught me. People reveal themselves when they think you've lost. Directors who had remained silent for months suddenly found confidence. He had losses. He made reckless investments. He refused restructuring. He ignored recommendations. One after another. Like wolves finally approaching a wounded animal. My father had been dead for 3 months. Only now did they find courage. I looked at Victor. He wasn't celebrating. He was observing me. Waiting. Testing. He wanted anger. He wanted an emotional outburst. A grieving son defending his father blindly. Instead, I closed the folder. Carefully. Gently. Then I stood. If my father approved these payments. I looked around the room. Then who benefited? Silence. I continued. Because the money certainly didn't save the company. No one answered. I gathered the documents. The meeting can continue. Victor narrowed his eyes. You aren't defending him? I met his gaze. I don't defend people. A pause. I look for truth. For the first time, Victor stopped smiling. Margaret was waiting outside my office when I returned. She had clearly heard everything. Her expression carried both anger and guilt. He forged them. Maybe. No, maybe. You sound certain. Because I know your father. I looked at the folder in my hands. Did you know everything about him? She fell silent. That was answer enough. No one ever knows everything. Not even family. Especially family. I entered the office and locked the door. Then I laid every authorization document across the table. 23 signatures. Identical. Perfect. Too perfect. My father's signature always slanted slightly upward when he was tired. These signatures didn't. Not once. They were copies. Excellent copies. But copies. Forgery. I closed my eyes briefly. Relief came first. Then anger. Someone had stolen from the company. Then blamed my father. Even after his death. My phone rang. Unknown number. Again. I answered. A familiar voice whispered. Stop digging. Click. This time I recognized it. Not the person. The breathing. The same caller from before. Calm. Controlled. Male. Someone accustomed to authority. Someone older. Someone who believed he couldn't be touched. I replayed the audio recording from my father's flash drive. The confrontation. The unknown voice. I listened again. Then again. My pulse slowed. The breathing pattern. The pauses. The way he pronounced certain words. I opened my eyes. No. It couldn't be. I played the anonymous call recording beside the old audio. The same rhythm. The same voice. Before I could process the realization, someone knocked. 3 short knocks. Then 2. Evelyn entered. She looked shaken. Mr. Hale. What happened? She handed me a sealed envelope. No return address. Inside was a photograph. My father. Standing beside a man. Both arguing in a parking garage. The timestamp was dated 4 days before his surgery. I turned the photo over. Written on the back were 6 words. He didn't die from stress. Below that, another sentence. Check the hospital records. My hands tightened around the photograph. My father had gone into surgery for what doctors called a severe cardiac event brought on by stress and exhaustion. That was the official story. The only story. The story I'd accepted. But if that story wasn't true, then this was never only about money. And if someone had hidden the truth about his death, how far had they already gone to protect themselves? The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and polished floors. It was the same smell I remembered from 3 months ago. The same silence. The same cold lighting that had turned the longest night of my life into something unreal. This time, I wasn't here as a grieving son. I was here looking for answers. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Mr. Hale. She lowered her voice. I'm sorry. I'm not here for condolences. I need my father's medical records. Her smile disappeared. I'm afraid those files require authorization. I am his next of kin. She hesitated. There's another restriction. What restriction? She looked around before leaning closer. They've already been requested. My heartbeat slowed. By whom? I can't disclose that. When? The morning after the funeral. Someone had tried to collect my father's medical records before I had even begun sorting through his belongings. That wasn't normal. Not even close. I placed my business card on the counter. I'll wait. 2 hours later, an elderly physician entered the consultation room. Dr. Samuel Pierce. He had performed my father's surgery. His shoulders looked heavier than I remembered. You've grown, he said quietly. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. So do I. He closed the door behind him. I reviewed your father's file before coming. Then tell me the truth. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed a sealed envelope from his briefcase. I should have given this to you months ago. I stared at it. What is it? A statement. About what? The night your father was admitted. I opened the envelope. His written statement described every event from the emergency admission to the operating room. One paragraph had been highlighted. Patient reported sudden dizziness approximately 30 minutes after drinking coffee during a board meeting. Symptoms progressed unusually fast. Coffee. I looked up. Stress doesn't work that way. Dr. Pierce slowly nodded. No. What are you saying? I'm saying. He took a long breath. Your father's symptoms were inconsistent with ordinary cardiac exhaustion. The room became completely silent. Did you tell anyone? I requested additional toxicology screening. And it was canceled. Canceled by hospital administration. Why? I was never given a reason. I felt anger rise through my chest. Who canceled it? I don't know. But someone had authority. He met my eyes. An influence. When I returned to Hale Dynamics, Evelyn intercepted me before I reached the elevator. Mr. Hale. Her voice trembled. The police are here. 2 detectives stood inside the lobby. Professional. Calm. Neither smiled. Mr. Adrian Hale? Yes. We'd like to ask a few questions. Regarding a financial complaint. Several employees stopped walking. The lobby fell quiet. One detective continued. A report alleges you concealed company assets to mislead creditors. Exactly what I expected. Someone had decided to attack me publicly. Who filed the complaint? I'm afraid we can't disclose that. Of course. Victor appeared from the executive elevators as though he had simply happened to arrive at the perfect moment. What unfortunate timing. I almost laughed. Perfect timing wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. I'll cooperate, I told the detectives. Victor folded his arms. A wise decision. I turned toward him. You're unusually interested. We all care about the company's reputation. No. I smiled faintly. You care about appearances. His expression hardened for a fraction of a second. Enough. The detectives escorted me into a private conference room. For nearly 2 hours, they questioned every financial decision I'd made. Research funding, employee salaries, supplier negotiations. Every answer remained the same. Transparent, documented, legal. Finally, the senior detective closed his notebook. This complaint lacks supporting evidence. I assumed as much. He stood. Be careful, Mr. Hale. Of what? False accusations usually precede something larger. That evening, Margaret burst into my office without knocking. She wasn't carrying files. She was carrying a cardboard archive box. I found it. I stood immediately. The safe. No. She placed the box on my desk. The backup. Inside were dozens of handwritten notebooks. Audit journals. Every investigation conducted by the Internal Audit Department over the last 7 years. Someone had missed them, or believed they had already been destroyed. Margaret carefully opened the oldest notebook. We kept 2 records. I looked at her. Digital. She pointed toward the empty shelves outside. And handwritten. She smiled for the first time since I'd met her. No hacker can erase ink. For the next 4 hours, we read in complete silence. Every notebook connected another missing piece. Payments approved outside company policy. Invoices altered after submission. Directors bypassing financial controls. Consultants billing impossible hours. Then, one name. Repeated. Again. 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 Victor Lang. Not directly. Never as recipient. Always as approver. Always the final signature before money disappeared. Margaret looked at me. He built distance. So no one could trace it. He expected electronic audits. She tapped the notebook. He never expected stubborn accountants. I closed the journal. This isn't enough. No. It's enough to investigate. But not enough to convict. She nodded. Then we keep looking. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. Daniel called just before midnight. I remembered something. What? Your grandfather. What about him? He never trusted signatures. I frowned. What do you mean? He insisted every major approval include personal meeting minutes. Meeting minutes. Not just signatures. Written discussions. Attendance lists. Questions. Comments. If Victor had forged approvals, he would also need meeting records. I searched the archive database. Nothing. Every relevant meeting record had disappeared. Too perfect. Then Evelyn called through the office intercom. Mr. Hale. Yes. We're cleaning the old executive storage room. And we found locked filing cabinets marked Chairman's personal archive. My pulse quickened. No one touched them. No. I'm coming. The storage room hadn't been opened in years. Dust covered everything. The filing cabinets stood untouched in the corner. Their locks still intact. The master key from my father's office fit perfectly. Inside, leather-bound binders. Meeting minutes. Attendance logs. Personal notes. Exactly what Victor shouldn't have forgotten. I opened the first binder. Meeting date. Payment approval. Attendees. Victor absent. Yet the forged authorization carried his approval from the same afternoon. Impossible. Another binder. Another contradiction. Then another. One after another. The lies unraveled with astonishing speed. By dawn, every forged approval had collapsed under its own weight. Victor hadn't simply manipulated the company. He had rewritten history, and history had finally answered back. I looked across the stacks of evidence filling the storage room. The silence felt different now. Not heavy. Not uncertain. Certain. For months I had chased fragments. Now I held the complete pattern. Someone entered quietly behind me. I didn't turn around. I know it's you, Victor. The footsteps stopped. Neither of us spoke. Then his voice echoed through the dim storage room. So, a long pause. You finally found what your father died protecting. Victor's voice carried no panic. Only disappointment. The kind a teacher might feel when a student solved a puzzle later than expected. I slowly closed the binder before turning to face him. He stood alone. No security. No lawyers. No board members. Just a gray suit, polished shoes, and the calm confidence of a man who had spent decades believing every situation could be negotiated. "You shouldn't be here," I said. He smiled faintly. "Neither should you." The storage room was dimly lit. Dust drifted lazily through the narrow beams of light, filtering from a small window near the ceiling. Between us lay 7 years of handwritten records. Evidence. Truth. History. Victor glanced at the binders. So Nathan kept them. My father trusted paper. He trusted people. His expression softened for the first time. That was his weakness. "No." I shook my head. "It was yours." His smile disappeared. "You spent years convincing decent people that loyalty was foolish." I placed my hand on the nearest binder. "My father inspired loyalty. You purchased obedience." For a brief moment, his eyes hardened. "You think this changes anything?" "I think it changes everything." He stepped closer. "You have notebooks. I have evidence. You have stories. I have records." He laughed quietly. "Courtrooms don't reward idealists." "No." I met his gaze without blinking. "They reward facts." Silence settled between us. Then Victor sighed. "I offered your father a graceful exit." I felt my jaw tighten. He refused. Because he wouldn't betray the company. He wouldn't adapt. He wouldn't steal. Victor looked toward the ceiling as though speaking to himself. "The world isn't divided between honest men and criminals. It's divided between winners and spectators." My father never believed that. And where did that belief leave him? The words struck harder than I expected. For a second, grief threatened to rise again. Then I remembered something my father had written. "Don't let them make your decision for you." Victor wanted anger. He wanted guilt. He wanted me to fight emotionally instead of strategically. I picked up the archive box. "I'm leaving." He frowned. "That's all. I've already won." His eyebrows narrowed. "You haven't even exposed me." "I don't need to." He watched me carefully. I walked past him. Just before reaching the door, I stopped. "The board meeting is tomorrow." Still facing away, I added, "You should attend." Then I left him standing alone among the records he had forgotten existed. That night, nobody slept. Margaret organized decades of audit journals. Daniel cross-referenced supplier histories. Evelyn contacted former employees willing to testify. Even the engineers who had nearly resigned volunteered to scan handwritten documents into digital archives. No one ordered them. They simply stayed. For the first time since inheriting Hale Dynamics, the company was acting like a company again. Not because the crisis had ended, because people believed the truth finally had a chance. Around 2 in the morning, the lights in the executive floor were still on. I walked through the quiet hallways carrying coffee for everyone. Margaret accepted hers with tired eyes. "You look like your father." "I've heard that." "No." She smiled. "I don't mean your face." She glanced toward the busy conference room. "He carried coffee himself, too." I laughed quietly. My father hated delegating. He believed leadership started with service. Those words stayed with me long after I returned to my office. Leadership wasn't about occupying the chairman's chair. It was about carrying weight before asking others to. The emergency board meeting began at 9 o'clock sharp. Every seat was occupied. Shareholders, legal advisors, representatives from the banks, external auditors, even reporters waited outside the conference room. The atmosphere felt entirely different from the day I inherited the company. Back then, people had come expecting a funeral. Today, they expected a verdict. Victor entered exactly on time, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. He even greeted several directors with his usual polite smile. If he felt nervous, he refused to show it. I stood as the meeting began. No speeches. I looked around the room. No accusations. I nodded toward the projector. Only evidence. The first document appeared. Original meeting minutes. The second, forged payment approvals. The third, handwritten audit notes. The fourth, supplier registrations proving that supposedly active consulting firms had ceased operating years earlier. Every document connected to the next. No dramatic interruptions. No emotional arguments. Only facts. The room grew quieter with every slide. A bank representative leaned forward. "When were these records discovered?" "Last week." Margaret answered before I could. "They were archived before the internal audit department was dissolved." Another auditor adjusted his glasses. "The handwriting appears consistent. It has already been verified." Daniel quietly handed over independent supplier records dating back 2 decades. The final slide appeared. A timeline. 7 years of fraudulent approvals. Every missing payment. Every forged authorization. Every disappearing department. Every decision that we can hail dynamics. And at the center of every pattern, Victor Lang. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Victor slowly rose to his feet. This presentation proves nothing. His voice remained calm. It proves inconsistencies. It proves theft. It proves negligence. But it does not prove intent. He looked around confidently. I recommend postponing conclusions until a proper investigation. The conference room door opened. 2 detectives entered. The same officers who had questioned me weeks earlier. Behind them came investigators from the Financial Crimes Division. The senior detective unfolded an official document. Victor Lang. The room froze. You are under investigation for corporate fraud, forgery, obstruction of financial oversight, and conspiracy. Victor didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply looked at me. For several long seconds. Then he smiled. A tired smile. Not triumphant. Not mocking. Just defeated. So Nathan was right. He lowered his head. You really are different. The detectives escorted him toward the door. He stopped once. Without turning around, he said quietly, I destroyed my own life long before today. Then he walked away. No applause followed. No celebration. Only silence. The kind of silence that comes when people finally understand the cost of their choices. I looked around the conference room. Employees, directors, former critics, people who had doubted me. No one looked at me as an 18-year-old anymore. They looked at me as the man who had refused to let the truth be buried. Outside the windows, the morning sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. For Hail Dynamics, the collapse had finally ended. Now the rebuilding could begin. The reporters were waiting before I reached the front steps. Microphones rose like a wall. Camera shutters erupted in rapid bursts. Mr. Hale, did you know Victor Lang personally benefited from the fraud? Will the company survive? Are you seeking revenge? Do you feel justice has been served? Questions flew from every direction. 3 months ago, I would have frozen. Now I simply stopped walking. The crowd fell unexpectedly quiet. I'll answer one question. Every microphone edged closer. Am I seeking revenge? I looked toward the headquarters behind me. Its glass facade reflected the morning sun instead of storm clouds. No. The reporters exchanged confused glances. I spent too much of my life believing revenge would heal loss. It doesn't. It only creates another person who can't move forward. A reporter called out. Then what happens now? I smiled faintly. We rebuild. Nothing more. I stepped into the waiting car and left. The following weeks were consumed by work. Not glamorous work. Necessary work. Every fraudulent contract was reviewed. Every honest supplier contacted personally. Every employee received an explanation instead of another rumor. Some departments couldn't be saved. Others returned stronger than before. The painful truth was unavoidable. Years of corruption couldn't be erased in a month. But they could stop growing. One afternoon, I stood in the production facility watching engineers restart a prototype assembly line that had been silent for nearly a year. The sound of machinery echoed through the building. To most people, it was only noise. To me, it sounded like breathing. Margaret walked over wearing a yellow safety helmet. I never thought I'd hear this again. Neither had I. She handed me a folder. The final employee review. I opened it. Several executives had resigned voluntarily. Some faced criminal investigations. Many ordinary employees had chosen to stay despite uncertainty. Then I noticed something. These salary increases. Margaret nodded. The first thing the finance department approved. For everyone who stayed. I smiled. They earned it. They did. She looked across the factory floor. So did you. I closed the folder. No. I only stopped standing in their way. Months passed. The court proceedings against Victor Lang dominated business headlines. Evidence continued emerging. Offshore accounts, forged signatures, bribed consultants, destroyed records. Each revelation confirmed what the handwritten journals had begun to uncover. One afternoon, I received a request. Victor wanted to meet. Daniel frowned when he heard. You don't owe him anything. I know. Then why go? I looked out the office window. Because unanswered conversations have a way of lingering. The correctional visitation room was smaller than I expected. Victor entered wearing a plain gray uniform. He looked older. Not because prison had changed him. Because pretending had finally ended. He sat down across from me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. I hated your father. I know. He made honest men look successful. I listened. He refused shortcuts. He embarrassed people like me. His voice carried no bitterness anymore, only exhaustion. I kept telling myself I'd return the money. When the company recovered. He laughed once. It never recovered. I studied him quietly. So you blamed him. I blamed everyone except myself. His shoulders slumped. That's how corruption begins. He looked directly at me. I thought winning meant owning everything. What do you think now? He smiled sadly. I own nothing. The guard announced that visitation time was ending. Victor stood. So, he hesitated. Did your father forgive me? I thought for a long moment. Then answered honestly. I don't know. A pause. But I hope one day. You forgive yourself for telling the first lie. He nodded once. No more words were needed. A year later, Hale Dynamics no longer resembled the company I had inherited. The lobby buzzed with conversation. The research laboratories were active again. The manufacturing floor ran 2 shifts instead of 1. New graduates worked beside veterans who had once packed their desks believing the end had come. Some things had changed forever. Others had simply returned to what they were always meant to be. One morning, Evelyn knocked gently on my office door. There's someone here to see you. Do I know them? I don't think so. A young man entered, carrying a worn backpack. He looked nervous. Mr. Hale, please sit. He remained standing. My father worked here. I searched his face. What was his name? Thomas Rivera. Recognition came immediately. One of the technicians who had stayed through the darkest days. He passed away last winter. I'm sorry. The young man nodded. He always talked about this company. He carefully placed a small wooden box on my desk. He wanted you to have this. Inside lay an old employee identification badge. Beside it was a folded letter. I opened it. The handwriting was uneven. Mr. Hale, if you're reading this, then I wasn't able to thank you in person. People think you saved a company. They're wrong. You reminded us that our work mattered. You reminded us that honesty still had a place somewhere. That was enough. I folded the letter carefully. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Finally, I looked at his son. Your father helped save this company too. He never believed that. He should have. The young man smiled through moist eyes. So should you. After he left, I walked to the large window overlooking the city. The skyline looked different now. Not because the buildings had changed. Because I had. The office door opened again. Margaret stepped inside. The board is waiting. I looked toward the empty chair that had once belonged to my father. It no longer felt like a monument. It was simply a chair. One that carried responsibility rather than memory. I picked up the employee badge and slipped it into my pocket. Let's go. The boardroom filled with familiar faces. Some were new. Some had been there from the beginning. But this time, no one argued before the meeting started. No one whispered about liquidation. No one questioned whether an 18-year-old belonged there. I took my seat. Not because it had been inherited. Because it had been earned. The meeting lasted less than an hour. As everyone began leaving, I remained behind for a moment. On the wall hung a framed photograph of the company's founders. My grandfather. My father. And now, an empty space reserved for the current chairman. I walked over and straightened the slightly crooked frame. Then I quietly spoke into the empty room. We finished what deserved finishing. Outside, the city carried on with its endless rhythm. People hurried to work. Factories opened. Lights changed. Life moved forward. So did I.